But we need to first talk about how Invention came about. And when it was first promoted, it was promoted as the companion skill to divination, whereas divination was the gathering skill and Invention would be the artisan skill. And,
Right.
with that, it was supposed to launch, in a 1-2 quick succession to kick off, that new cadence of the Sixth Age. But obviously, that didn't happen, and there was supposed to be a use for the divination materials. It also was supposed to bring forward technology for Gielinor, in particular for the Godless to use in the Sixth Age. We kind of know where they went. They didn't really play much into the Sixth Age storyline, unfortunately. We had Cave Goblin.
Cooler.
Yeah, that's true. We had Cave Goblin electricity, Dwarven steam, and human divine energy, and this was going to all tie into the developments of the Sixth Age. And, I don't really think they leaned on that as much as they wanted to, because I think they saw with World Event 1 that everybody was hyper-focused on Saradomin, and then the other people were focused on Zaros, and then they realized, oh, we really need to, shift this and reframe what Zamorak is about. And with that, I kind of think that Godless fell through the cracks in the floor, and they never really managed to tell that story.
They had a few too many factions to really pull together.
Yeah, and I think Mod Jack talked about that, is that, you don't do a massive storyline with 8 factions and let players decide which one they're going to be a part of.
Right.
So.
Yep.
But the first elite skill, do you guys remember what you thought of that? Promise, fear, concern, hype?
All the above.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't care for it, really, at the time of release. I was super busy, 3 months away from taking my medical college admission test. I was just, off my brain studying when this first released, so I got to it over that summer and into the fall. And I maxed it over the course of, 6 to 7 months. I really didn't rush. I wasn't maxed at the time. And so it wasn't a race for me to get a cape back. It was just I was getting closer. I had most of my skills up in the 90s. I've been playing for, at that point, a little under 10 years. And it was just, still kind of trying to figure out a lot of, what exactly I was doing. And so when the skill came out, I'm like, oh, this is a thing that exists, but I didn't have a use for it, right? We, at the time, definitely didn't understand how beneficial perks necessarily were. And we're all like, well, I've been doing fine without them. And I definitely just continued on that route where Invention didn't seem all that useful to me. A lot of the devices that we have in use now that I use, we went going through the devices in pre-show, talking about how we use, pretty much all of them. With some exceptions, almost all the devices are, regularly traded and wanted and used. And so few of those existed, right? It was a lot about perking and leveling weapons and gear and, tools came later a lot of the time, right? It was originally just the fishing rod, and so they've added in so much stuff that has made it a useful functional skill since. On release, I'm like, this is interesting, but didn't, people were acquiring huge stockpiles of divine energy at dirt cheap prices because we had no use for it. It was just a resource that existed in the game.
Yeah, but eventually we did need it for our divine charges and such. And I still think divine charge gathering is still a good money making method that's AFK low intensive.
It's a lovely AF for how AFK it is, absolutely. Yeah. But at the time of release, And
then we turn the page to today on this, and we look at where Invention has landed, and we realize that divination
Yep, perfect.
and Invention are not that closely tied together, and in its best case, Invention uses divination's divine charges, and we're left in a situation where Jagex still had to find a spot for divination, and I still think it could use some items in it. They fixed the training of it last year, but it didn't fix divination because it arrived too late, and of course it had its own launch issues that Tanis has alluded to. Tech trees also didn't materialize to where we are today. They were added a couple months later, and with that came skilling perks as well. But the tech trees, I feel, personally, never materialized to their full potential. And they miss...
Well, they released them, and they're awful.
Yeah, and
they're just...
it's one of the huge missed opportunities of Invention. Because a tech tree doesn't matter if you can unlock everything in it and specialize in the entire thing. The point of tech trees is that you have to pick and choose which way you go, and the more you put into one path, it makes the other ones harder to go down.
And remember, on release, you got access to both tech trees, but you got access to one of them at level 40 and the other one at level 60. And every device in the tree that you picked was like, they just bumped everything in the other tree up 20 levels. Everything. In terms of being able to unlock it. And that, again, that has been done away with. And part of this is like they had something unlock every 10 levels. Again, as I was mentioning earlier, you jump 10 levels every time you disassemble something in the skill. If you're wearing a top and legs augmented, and you disassemble them at the same time, you're jumping more than 10 levels at those kind of levels.
So it didn't really become it didn't really do the tech tree thing then, is what we're getting.
It didn't do the tech tree thing. It was obnoxious to people didn't like it because it was not like, I think the implementation is the biggest thing to take away from this, right? Like the goal with a lot of these is to do the big like takeaways for what to change. Is that the difference when you compare it to something like archaeology is that when archaeology was released, it was planned out to a T. They had everything incoming and outgoing at specific rates. They'd done a generally good job of making everything balanced and well thought through. And with Invention, they didn't. It was very clear that they just this is a cool idea, let's do it. And then they chucked it at us. And the feedback we had was, no, we don't like it. Because it wasn't enjoyable. It didn't flow. It didn't have that
And when you think of it, Invention is the second to last biggest update of this era where Jagex was stumbling. The last one was Menaphos.
To some degree, although again, I mean, the reputation system in Menaphos, yes, that's true.
Yeah.
Engagement hours was not a good metric to be judging when they released that type of content. But again, I think this is very hindsight 2020 kind of a response.
Yeah,
but I think it's a lot of how much foresight can you put into designing this content, because you have to design it to do you have to understand where we're going to be coming from and where the player angle is going to be. And my hope is for Necromancy that they'll have learned, and that archaeology was better for a reason, and that's going to continue to go forward. But Invention didn't release well, and that's the comparison to now, right?
And that's why we wanted to have this discussion. At the end
Invention as it was now, if we're a new player getting into it, if they released Invention today in its current form, what would we have to say about it? And I think some of the problems are still there. I think the elite skill, I think Dennis might agree with this too, the elite skill, scaling on it isn't great, and the unlock requirements aren't great, and how unclear gizmos are isn't great, but it trains much more smoothly. It offers a lot more rewards. It's got a lot of neat and niche things to it. It is a true support skill, and that's great. We love that. But
yeah, and at the end of the day, you also take away that, like we were saying, you had the tech tree launch in May. You then had batch 2 in September 2017. Then you had another batch with archaeology, with ancient Invention, and so on and so forth. And you wind up with this situation where it took that long for it to become fully fleshed out, and it really shows that there was an issue with the concept. Whereas if 2023 Jagex took on this skill, I think you're right, it would have been an entirely different outcome.